Unfortunately, the Supreme Court agreed and found that law invalid, reversed it. But it's a similar issue we're seeing a lot now that has not, to our knowledge, been litigated to a conclusion concerning, for instance, the use of pronouns or names. So can an employer or government agency require you to refer to people by pronouns that do not align with their biological birth gender? Or is that infringing upon your religious liberty? Frankly, at this point, there is no definitive answer to that question, but it will likely be taken up by the Supreme Court soon.
Can they make your church or your Christian school or your Sunday school or your Christian camp or a business in your church, somebody just a businessman, can they make you have to say things against your faith when it comes to these gender issues? That's what this case was about. They wanted these, we don't provide abortions, but they wanted these ultrasound people to have to tell people where they could go get abortions and things like that. We know it was against their faith. And the Supreme Court came down and said, no, you cannot require them to do that. That's a good win. That's a very good win. That was not our case, but that was a good win. The bottom line is what we're flooded with is Christians being told kids have the right to come in and change their attendance records, their baptismal records, their church records, and we want you to have to notify if it's a boy and they want to be a girl or a girl wants to be a boy, or the new one is they want to be a nun, they're neither, or they're mixing back and forth, they're transsexual, one day they're a boy, one day they're a girl. We are inundated with this coming in. And I want to tell you, we're getting it through every avenue you can imagine. It's coming in through Christian schools, home schools, public schools have given in on. And the bottom line is, what we're telling people right now is this is one you want to pray about extensively. Because if you have to call people contrary to your belief, titles and names, okay, that's amazing. I was listening to a fellow the other day. He said, my son is going to an Ivy League school. We went up there and we spent a whole day deciding what gender he would be. And I said, what do you mean what gender he would be? He said, well, you can pick whatever gender you want and they have to do it. Society is not with us on this. About 65% of the churches in our country, now this is a broad spectrum, have no problem with it. But we are saying, no, no, no. You cannot force us. How many of you believe God created male and female? Right? Yeah. The bottom line is this is where we're at. Now, I want to tell you this. When I started 50 years ago, I never dreamed I'd be litigating what I'm now litigating. I didn't think my grandchildren would ever see this stuff. But here it is now, and we're litigating it. And you want to get behind this and pray for this, because if they have the right, let me tell you where they're at. They want to change the sermons. That already happened in Houston, Texas, and that got defeated. But they want you to have to go by terminology that they say, and it has to do with this. This is a good decision, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. And Seth, how many calls like this do we get on gender at the Christian Law Association?
Like 12, 14 calls at least a day. It's a wide range. It's not just in your church anymore if you're a nurse or work at a school. This isn't an argument of they could be a boy or girl if they want at the workplace. That's a whole separate argument. This is them forcing you to speak something that is contrary to your faith. I think that's where the distinction lies. So for them to say, I have to say something that would be a violation of my faith.
That's where the U.S. Supreme Court's going.
Anybody with a question on that? You're all going to live with these results. If the Lord tarries, this is coming down our way. Because what they want to do is say, if you don't do this, then you can't be tax exempt. And you've involved yourself in hate speech, and that's criminal. So these are going to be very serious issues. Here's what they're confident of. When they say this to us all the time, your people will give in. Your people aren't going to jail over this. They may not like it, but they'll give in. Because their faith don't matter that much to them. I'm telling them, I think you're wrong.
Amen.
I think you're wrong. I think some people will give in, sadly. But you need to decide where you're at. Do they have the right? And by the way, with your own children, we're having parents being told, you have to call your daughter a boy. Treat them. What's that?
an issue we're seeing now is in custody disputes where one parent is opposed to, say, for instance, giving hormonal treatments to a 12-year-old that would be contrary to their biological gender, and the other parent is for it. And ultimately, it's coming down to what a family law judge says. And again, all of these situations, they'll many times have certain facet that is similar, but it's a relatively new issue in the mainstream. Really, with 2015 and legalizing of same-sex marriage across the country, these issues have now kind of sprouted up more now to the forefront of attention, whereas before they were really quite secondary compared to the focus on marriage.
If we did just the gender issues, we could be here all day. I want you to understand, on a 0 to 10 scale, with 0 being it don't matter and 10 mean it's off the chart, these are 2000s. This is incredible. We're flooded with these issues. And Christians are getting caught in the crossfire. Let them put hormones in your child. If your child says, I know I'm a boy, but I think I'm a girl, what does your faith say? Well, it starts with the name. Are you willing to say Harry to Sally? The bottom line is pray for these cases. We do not have good Supreme Court law on this yet. The culture is not behind us. The culture's not there, even among the conservative set. What's the next thing on our list there, Jonathan?
The next case, Trinity case, which basically the Supreme Court reviewed a law, and it's a good outcome, but one that we have a note of importance at the end, that paragraph with a note, basically saying that the government cannot be hostile towards religion, and that potentially funding for a religious entity that does not promote religion. In the case in question, it involved, I believe, shredded tires for playground cushioning. And in that case, I believe the adage went, we're not furthering religion, we're trying to limit scuffed knees. So if there's clearly a secular purpose and benefit, potentially government funding can be eligible to a religious organization or a church or a ministry. However, as our experience, there are usually strings of some sort, sometimes quite substantial, connected to that funding. And even if there are not today, all it takes is the next administration, the next state government to change the requirements potentially. And if a ministry is dependent upon government funding for a decent amount of their income, that can be a pretty precarious situation. So it's our general counsel to not seek government funding for a ministry due to that possibility. But this case basically made it slightly easier to potentially qualify.
This is huge right now because lots of groups are saying we want to get government money to fund our homeschools, to fund our Christian schools, our day camps, daycares. They want to get the money. This was a huge change in the law, huge change. We are warning people, if you take government money, read the agreements you sign to get it very carefully, because you cannot imagine what's in all the fine print. What we run into continually is people sign up to get this money and they never read the document. They just signed at the end. How many of y'all ever went to rent a car? You ever do that? They hand you the thing, you sign it, you don't read it. You just hand it back to them because you're not going to get the car if you don't sign it. Well, that's what they're doing with these things. And the agreements have egregious conditions in them. So if you're going to take government money, read the agreement meticulously and get somebody to help you define the terms. We'll be glad to help you do it. Others can do it, but make sure you know what you're getting into, okay? Because now they're trying to open the fountain to get more government funds in. And Seth, tell them about what we're battling now in Florida. And other states have got the same program, just by different names.
So the national media is starting to pick up the Orlando Sentinel, Florida, very liberal, opened an investigation. There's a program called Step Up Florida, and essentially they fund education, kids to choose where they want to go to school, and Christian schools are eligible to receive those funds through the student. And what happened is these investigators pulled all the policies of the Christian schools off their website, and if they discriminated on sexual orientation,
Homosexuality.
Homosexuality. They basically said they shouldn't be allowed to receive these funds. And it's a little complicated because a lot of the funds are given from big business, but they're given a tax incentive for it. And so now they're putting a big pressure on these big businesses to stop funding it until they stop the discrimination. So it's kind of a blend of the first two cases. They're saying if you're not going to act like us and do this, we're going to pull your government funding. And so there's going to be lawsuits over it. But it's one of the first states that's really making a push on this issue.
It's a lot of money too. It's $5,000 a head, is it not, Seth? That's a lot.
That scholarship tax credit, is that what that is?
Yeah,
'Cause I know Florida's big and they up their ante to like 25 million or even higher.
Right.
So they have
Right.
several scholarships. Their Step Up's one of the big ones. Essentially what it is, the waste company there, I forget the name of it, but it's the big garbage company there. I think they get $100 million a year or something like that. But then they get a dollar for dollar tax credit.
Waste management company.
Yeah. Privately funded, but it's a limited benefit because they're getting that tax incentive. I think 3 of the companies have said they're going to stop giving until these schools, which, by the way, the schools have the right to do that. It's not against the law there. So it's just a pressure.
And I want to go back to what Jonathan mentioned. It was condition free when it started. Now they're all dependent on it and they're adding conditions. Once you get people dependent on the money, parents say, well, if you won't do it, there's a ministry right down the street that might do it. Okay. And so it's creating a lot. Read these agreements meticulously. I cannot tell you the number of parents and pastors and others who wept when they said, we just had no idea that's what we signed into. Be sure you know what the government pays, the government controls. And they should. It's their money. The bottom line, know what you're getting into.
The next case, and this is probably familiar to most of you as it got a lot of media attention at the time leading up to it, but it's the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. While it was a victory for religious liberty, it is a very, very narrow ruling by the Supreme Court. They did not take this opportunity to lay out a broad, quick. The Supreme Court, when they take up a dispute or a case or controversy, they determine in their ruling how wide they're going to make it. So, for instance, Brown v. Board of Education case from back when the desegregated public schools was a very, very broad ruling, basically saying we're not going to have segregated schools, period. This was incredibly narrow and highly focused in particular on statements made by the Colorado Civil Rights Commission that were denigrating to the faith of the individual, the plaintiff. So in general, it did come out in favor of religious liberty, but it did not really set up substantial protections that we would have liked to see. So it was a positive step, but a small one.
The lawsuit is still going on. We have, that we're defending, and there's many others, all kinds of bakers, wedding planners, and photographers, all of whom are saying the same thing. And not as a matter of our faith do same-sex. Well, we won't do same-sex, and they're being sued. And they're all in this funnel pipeline waiting to see what the Supreme Court is going to do with Master Cake. Huge issue here, because it then comes down, can churches refuse? Can you refuse to do homosexual weddings or to let people use your facilities? If you let others use your facilities, can they let you have to give to them the same way? Huge issues. Businesses are caught in this because these businessmen are saying, wait a minute, we want to be fair, we want to do what's right, but our faith says we can't be a part of something that we believe is wrong in the sight of God. And that's where these lawsuits are all. This is going to be a major thing when the Supreme Court finally decides the issue. Pray about this. Many say under the existing Supreme Court, we do not have the votes. We do not have. Because what they're saying is, if same-sex marriage is legal, that has to be protected. And where does your religious liberty come in? And they want to say, this is going to be a carved-out exception. The bottom line is, we want to pray that it is carved out. Because we've got all these people, these businessmen. We got a lady that we're involved with in the state of Washington. This has literally destroyed them financially. And these are godly people. but they're caught in this. And the question is, are the people in your ministry just normal business people? If you say, we don't want to have a part in something that's overtly homosexual, and then they're asking all these questions, well, would you rent them motel rooms? Would you let them come to your church and sit in the couples class? Can they go to marriage retreats? They're asking for everything. So what we're telling people is this is going to be very serious to the faith. Okay. This has very little to do with this poor guy with his cakes. He just happened to get caught early on and was the case that got sprung up ahead of everybody. The ones they went after the most were photographers and wedding planners. A lot of photographers for weddings just said, no, I'm not going to take pictures of them in romantic poses, kissing. I'm not going to do that. Okay, that's against my faith. Boy, they got clocked on it. So you want to pray for these things. And Seth, anything that we add on top of that?
And most of the time, our experience is they're targeting them. Dr. Hughes mentioned this last session, but he said, I'm fine to sell them a cake. They can have a cake. I'm just not going to use my artistic ability to support the marriage of someone. There is a distinction in his case, but a lot of times we'll get this. We had one the other day. It was a girl that was 19, just out of school, started a photography business, and you go to her website, that's everything I do is for Christ. Everything's about Christianity, and then all of a sudden she's getting these phone calls. Hey, I want you to do our homosexual wedding. So a lot of times they're being targeted for this type of stuff because they want to make it an issue.
This is also an area as well that is split between the states in that federally sexual orientation and gender identity are not protected class federal law. And I believe the last 26 states currently have it protected at the state level. So Kentucky is not one of them. Now there's Ohio business in one of those states. And the extra layer as well is potentially there can be county ordinances or city
You do
ordinances.
have counties that,
For instance,
and you
Birmingham, Alabama has one.
you have bills here to make it. Hear about these bills and they don't comprehend what's this about. It's about this. What they want to do is make it where it's illegal to do. And you discriminate. We discriminate based on our faith. We say, I can't do that. That's, in our opinion, scripturally wrong. Okay? And we will not do it. And they're just confident you're going to cave in. I should tell you this. Lawyers on the other side are saying to us, your people aren't going to jail for this. They're not going to do that. Your people, before they go to jail, will call kids any name they want, agree to any gender they want, and give in to all these things. They're confident of that. Now, I'm telling them, I think you're wrong. Dead wrong. I think some people will give in. But I'm telling you, I believe there's people of conviction. But what would your convictions be? You understand, these people, if we lose their cases, they lose everything. The lady up in Washington, her husband and hers whole life, whole retirement and everything gone, their business gone. Would you do that? Or would you just bake the cake and go along with the wedding? Go there and be a part of a wedding planner for a homosexual wedding? Would you do it? I want to tell you, society is not with us on this, but the faith is. And you have to decide where you're at. Jonathan, what's next?
Next, we have updated guidance on constitutionally protected prayer and religious expression in public elementary and secondary schools.
This is something the president did. This was a good thing. And many of you heard about it, but people didn't understand what it was. They thought it was a whole new First Amendment. It's not. Tell them what it is, Jonathan.
Originally, it was in the early 90s, President Clinton predating guidance, legal guidance on the religious liberty rights of public school students. Public school students have a tremendous number of religious rights. The courts have time and time again found that actions on behalf of a school to limit the religious expression of a student are almost always found as unconstitutional and invalid. Now, on the flip side, employees of public schools are some of the least constitutionally protected people to express their religious beliefs and opinions. So it's kind of a bit of a dichotomy there. But this is just laying out an updated version of that guidance from the early 90s. But we actually have a link at the end of this document here. You can pull it up and see. It's definitely worth your time to go through and review if you have any children in the public school or in your ministry, if there are children that attend. So they're aware, because The public school system in the United States is very decentralized as well. What that ultimately boils down to is you can have very large differences district to district, superintendent. If a student that you're aware of is experiencing issues or being told they can't pray at lunch, they can't bring their Bible to school, they can't fill in the blank, that's just not accurate. Usually then when they realize what the law is and that's brought to them, it'll be rectified.
There's a huge difference county to county. And the county next door is perfectly good with it and comes and testifies in our trials to help us. So very county specific stuff. You have some very conservative counties in your state. You have some liberal counties in your state. And these things are hitting on it. Now, we're very passionate about Christian education. Very passionate. But we still have millions of kids in the public schools. Millions. And we don't write them off. And they have protected rights. The president helped reaffirm those. You want to go back and look at them. Please, if you went to the public school in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, don't for a second think that's the school that exists today. It has changed dramatically. We need these protected rights. The gentleman back here had his hand up, and I never got to you. I apologize.
All right. With the Supreme Court, there's 9 justices, right?
Right?
And the majority of them want to give the rights to 2 men or 2 women if they're married.
That's correct.
Basically, they got the power to push that over on the rest of the people.
That's correct.
Is there any way that we change the Supreme Court, or is that the way it's set up?
No, it's got to go back to the Supreme Court. But once it's decided, then it becomes way harder to get it undone. Way harder.
They're appointed for
life
by the president.
I see where the gays got their rights.
I've got 3 little boys. Where's their rights? If they're watching TV or if they're out in the park?
Turn on the Super Bowl and look at what they were showing.
Right.
The bottom line is there's a huge disparity with this judicial activism. I told this to the other group. We first went up against same-sex marriage in California. We fought it there for, I think, 8 years and we won. Then we went to Hawaii and they tried again and we won. Then we went to the state of Washington and we won. And then we went to Iowa and we lost in Iowa, which was the first state to approve it. Now, if you'd have told me that was going to happen in Iowa, I'd have said no way. But it did. And now the country is changed on this issue. 60-70% of the people in America think it should be perfectly legal.
Well, they don't know God.
That's totally correct. That's totally correct. But I'm still telling you, the courts are very susceptible to the pressure of the culture. Very susceptible. We want to make sure that we honor their time constraints. I hope, remember I said a sip at a fire hose? I'm sorry to make this so brief and so pointed. Our ministry sends out a newsletter every month, and it's free, absolutely free. How many of you get our newsletter? Anybody here? Oh, good number. Please, would you permit us to send it to you? We ask one thing in exchange for the newsletter. Would you give us 1 minute a month in prayer for the lawsuits? Not a minute a day, not a minute a week. Would you give us 1 minute a month and pray for it? People all the time say to me, boy, the lawsuits in your newsletter are so interesting. And I always tell them, a lawsuit's only interesting if it's not your lawsuit. When it's your lawsuit, it's terrifying. We covet your prayers. How many of you would like to get our newsletter? Just hold your hand up. Just take this card and fill it out. Please print. Please print. And we're going to have you pick it up just right away. Please print. We have to have a zip code. Ladies, don't put it in your purse. What goes in a lady's purse is never seen again. So, guys, more deadly than a lady's purse is that inside coat pocket. Don't put it in there. Please. And then please pray for these lawsuits. I believe the Lord's coming soon. But if the Lord doesn't come for another 10 or 20 years, what America are we leaving these kids? That's why we've got to stand on these cases. We covet your prayers. If you ever have a case or an issue we can help you with, or you have a question on, please feel free to call us. Feel free. We'll give you all our contact information, and we're giving you a Bible bookmark celebrating our 50th year. It's gold colored because it's 50. We started in 1969. And would you put this in your Bible, and when you see it, breathe a prayer for the lawsuits? I'm not asking you to pray for me. I'm begging you to pray for the case. I'm insignificant. These people taking these stands, they're the ones truly in harm's way. Truly in harm's way. And we need to pray for them. Need to pray. We'll pick those up going out the door. Yes, sir.
One more question.
Yes, sir.
So you're talking about benefits, taking government money and such. Is that similar to churches that are corporate registered 501c3 corporations? Are they not receiving a government benefit subject to the regulations?
They have not succeeded in establishing that yet, but they're trying. They're trying, but they have not succeeded yet. I don't know all of the calls. And what comes to me is stuff that blows up. Okay, you understand what I'm saying that I need to weigh in on. But I mean, while we're sitting here, dozens of calls will have come in the last hour.
We've
Okay.
got that same thing. We get that all the time.
Yeah.
In the school, somebody new, and we can talk a long time about it, but the big thing is just policies. But they're not popular in the media. That's the thing, they attack you.
Jonathan, let's pick up those cards. Please let us take your cards as you walk out the door. Please let them get them so we get them. You can't mail it. Thank you.
Hello, this is Frank Simon with the rest of the news. We have two special guests. We have Cindy Marlowe and
Hello?
John Brewer, Pastor John Brewer. And we're really glad that you're here with us today. And we have some very important things to discuss with you. One of them is that there is a important session going on, legislative session going on in Frankfurt right now, and there are a lot of very important bills being discussed, and some of them are being passed. John, did you want to say something about that?
And take two extremes. We've been talking about the Virginia gun laws, and it seemed like the assault ban seemed like it was just going to go through without much resistance or whatever. Lo and behold, when people became activated, there were some votes switched. So I guess I want to contrast that with what we got going on in our legislature,
Right.
so that people understand that we can make a difference too.
And all of our listeners.
That absolutely.
So it's a praise, actually, that they actually were going to go forward with the gun bans in Virginia, but it's halted for now, which is a wonderful thing.
They tabled it, which means they're coming back for a fight later on, but we will be too.
I want to say about why we are having this program.
Well, there's several issues, several bills that we're watching, and I wasn't sure that our listeners are always aware of just what's going on. Sometimes you're aware of good things, and sometimes you're aware of bad things, but really it's a constant battle.
Yes.
And a lot of times, the legislator won't get much praise a lot of times for fighting off the bad stuff. It's so important for our listeners to be engaged. It's so important for them to call, to pray. You would not believe how much that actually helps and encourages.
Right.